Sick and tired of hearing things from uptight, short-sighted, narrow-minded hypocritics. All I want is the truth. Just give me some truth. I've had enough of reading things by neurotic, psychotic, pig-headed politicians. All I want is the truth. Just give me some truth. No short-head, yellow-bellied son of tricky dickies gonna mother humming soft soap me with just a pocket full of gold. Money for dough, money for psychotic, pig-headed politicians. All I want is the truth. Just give me some truth. Oh, give me some truth. All I want is the truth. Just give me some truth now. Oh, all I want is the truth. Oh, just give me some truth. Oh, all I want is the truth now.
As spring began to bloom in Washington, D.C., President Nixon took the time to have an impromptu conversation with two of his close aides. H.R. Haldeman and John Ehrlichman were known by Nixon staffers as the Berlin Wall because of their German-sounding names and their penchant for isolating Nixon from anyone who wanted to see him. The only problem was, this little off-the-cuff conversation was being recorded by the secret White House taping system, and President Nixon's thoughts, as well as those of Haldeman and Ehrlichman, would soon become a part of presidential history.
Let's look at Northern California. You understand? Yeah. You know what's happened in San Francisco.
San Francisco is just gone.
It's
Clear over.
I don't know, but it isn't just down in the ratty part of town. But the upper class in San Francisco is that way. The Bohemian Grove that I attend from time to time, the Easterners and the others that come there. But it is the most faggy goddamn thing you will ever imagine. The San Francisco crowd that goes in there. It's just terrible. I mean, I don't want to shake hands with anybody in San Francisco. Really?
Well, it's a different set of values.
Welcome everybody to a brand new stream. It's not like that other stream. I'll get all the pleasantries out of the way because we've got a lot to get through tonight. I think most of you know me already. I'm Spirit. This is Moose Heaven. And tonight, we're gonna be looking at UFO disclosure. We're gonna follow the money, find out who's really behind it, why you should probably, no definitely, be skeptical about it. Then after that, we're gonna look at the Beatles. Everybody's favorite Fab Four mop tops. What were they up to? But Spirit, I hear you say in your whiny voice, I don't like the Beatles. That's okay. You don't have to. Because we're going to look at the darker aspects of the Fab Four, all the skeletons in the closet. There's going to be kidnappings. It's going to get dark. Oh, you can't hear me? Let me boost that. How about now? Can you hear me now? Let me turn the music down. That's probably... I'm still getting used to a brand new setup and getting all the audio and whatchamacallit. So let me explain how the donation system is going to work around here. I'm sure that you can see that there is a Buy Me a Coffee link. You can follow that. The link is in the chat, in the description. You can click on that link, go over there. I will read out your coffees during the show when we take a break and after the break. Mike's fine. Woohoo. Welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us on this premiere episode of Moose Heaven. I got a lot planned for this little channel. If you join through the memberships on Buy Me a Coffee, you'll actually get something. If you're feeling generous, you can donate at any level. And guess what? You get access to extra videos. That's right. I have so many things that I can't show them all on one stream. So you can go over there. You can join as a member. And then you get access to those videos. For instance, there's some interviews that I collated over there, and the audio is abysmal. So I ran it through Isotope RX10. It's all cleaned up now. These are the best quality versions of these interviews that you're going to get on the internet. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, buymeacoffee.com/mooseheaven. I got a lot to get through tonight, so I don't have time to shill or grift or whatever you call it. Because guess what? I'm gonna make what might be a bold claim for some of you. I'm going to contend that nobody ever heard of or saw a flying saucer until 1947. Despite what all of your History Channel, Ancient Aliens, disinformation is gonna tell you, nobody ever heard of such a thing as a flying saucer until 1947. Preposterous, you say? Well, let's look into it. Let me set the stage for you. It's 1947. What's going on in 1947? Well, it's the beginning of the post-World War II era. It's the official start of the Cold War, and tensions are high. The nuclear doomsday clock is installed. A little branch called the Central Intelligence Agency is created. And then a few months later, Israel becomes an official nation. Not saying that has anything to do with this, I'm just setting the stage. Also, a little thing that's gonna come up later called the Tavistock Institute becomes a thing. And it's in the midst of this that this man, Kenneth Arnold, he sees something. A UFO. Now, people had seen UFOs prior to this, unidentified flying objects. It's something in the sky that you can't identify, therefore, it's unidentified. But most of those things then turn out to be something, right? And in World War II, you had lots of UFOs. They called them Foo Fighters. But we're talking about a brand new era in UFO sightings. Because now we're not talking about Foo Fighters anymore. We're talking about flying saucers. So on June 24th, 1947, while flying his plane near Mount Rainier, Kenneth Arnold sees 9 shiny disc-shaped objects. Now, he later shows a picture of what they look like. They look more like Batman's thing. I think he saw 9 Batmans. Personally. But nevertheless, Kenneth Arnold claimed to see something. Actually, what I really think he saw, based on the shape, just my personal 2 cents, I think he saw the reflection of his propellers in the window of his cockpit. I think that's why he saw 9 in a row, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, this kicks off a whole new era in UFO sightings, the post-war flying saucer craze, where all of a sudden they're not from a foreign country, they're from outer space. So, kill the music. Let's learn more about it.
In 1947, the United States was beginning to enter a very serious environment with the Cold War. The Soviet Union was looking like a very dominant power in Europe. It had taken control of much of Eastern Europe. It looked like it was going to try to push in and take control of places like Greece and various other parts of the Balkans. And there was great concern that we were going to be head-to-head with the Soviet Union in a competition that could last a short or a long time, but may well end in nuclear annihilation. So there was a lot of concern about that. It's in this particular context that the UFO craze in 1947 really begins. It all starts really with a fellow named Kenneth Arnold. The picture that you see in the back here is him. He was an amateur pilot. He was a businessman. And he was flying around Mount Rainier on June 24th, where he claims to have seen an unidentified flying object, a UFO. Now, UFOs are legitimate. Probably we've all seen UFOs, something we cannot identify that is flying off in the distance. The chances are at some point in time, as you continue to look at this thing, you will be able to identify it. But for the moment, it's a UFO. He saw something, we think. He certainly reported it as such. He called it a flying saucer. And that set off a real craze with lots of people. Here you can see on the left-hand side this magazine Fate, which has the story of the flying discs, as he called them. And it kicked off a wave of UFO sightings beginning in the latter part of June of 1947 and running through the end of that particular summer. More than 300 were reported at the time, and just over the 4th of July weekend of that particular year. So people are seeing lots of things. What they are seeing is anyone's guess. I would be willing to bet it was not extraterrestrial, whatever it was, because there's just no indication of that anywhere in any documentation that anybody can find. Also, later in life, Mr. Arnold's story changes somewhat. Here he is, a bit older, describing more what he saw, which is not a flying disc at all, but looks more like some sort of a bat thing that, and I'm thinking of boomerang or something like that, that is what it looks like. But nonetheless, it set off this craze, and lots of people saw lots of things.
So, Kenneth Arnold sees something. We can agree upon that. This is a book that he later comes out with. It's a collection of his writings from Fate magazine. I put it in here because, interestingly enough, it's the first appearance in popular culture where Arnold's story gets a little bit more elaborate, shall we say? And it's the first time in popular culture that Arnold claims to be visited by the Men in Black. So, I don't know for certain, don't take my word on this, but I don't think that Arnold was the one who coined the term flying saucers. I think it comes from the media, right? Arnold said he saw something. The picture that he gave doesn't look like a saucer. It looks like a Batman wing. Nevertheless, the media runs with this term, flying saucers. June 26, 1947, supersonic flying saucers sighted by Idaho pilot. And then after this, hundreds of people start seeing flying saucers and the media starts running with it. July 6, 1947, more flying saucer seen as men of science ponder serious angles. Now, normally I don't care too much about dates and those sorts of things, but I want you to pay attention to the dates in this. Kenneth Arnold's sighting is on June 24th. And by July 6th, hundreds of people have seen flying saucers. Here's another one. July 6th, 1947. So everybody's seeing flying saucers. It kicks off this thing called the 1947 flying saucer craze, where hundreds of people are seeing flying saucers. Now, I want you to pay attention to these dates, right? July 6th. Hundreds of people are seeing flying saucers. Okay? On July 7th, 1947, next day, two stories came out where Arnold raised the topic of possible extraterrestrial origins. both as his opinion and those who had written to him. In an Associated Press story, Arnold said that he had received quantities of fan mail eager to help solve the mystery, none of it calling him a screwball. Many of the writers, like a doomsday preacher Arnold spoke of, placed a religious interpretation on his sighting, but others said he, quote, suggested the discs were visitations from another planet. Now, prior to this, Arnold just claimed to see something, and people were seeing flying discs and flying saucers and cigar-shaped objects. But nobody really talked about them being from other planets. Up until then, it was just assumed, oh, they're foreign in origin. In another story, Arnold was interviewed by the Chicago Times. Kenneth Arnold is not so certain that the strange contraptions are made on this planet. Arnold said he hoped the devices were really the work of the U.S. Army. But he told the Times in a phone conversation, if our government knows anything about these devices, the people should be told at once. A lot of people out here are very much disturbed. Some think that these things may be from another planet. But they aren't harming anyone, and I think it would be wrong. It would be the wrong thing to shoot one of them down. Even if it can be done, their high speed would completely wreck them. Arnold, in pointing to the possibility of these discs being from another world, said regardless of their origin, they apparently were traveling to some reachable destination. Whoever controlled them, he said, obviously wasn't trying to hurt anyone. He said the discs were making turns so abruptly and rounding peaks that they would have been impossible for human pilots inside to have survived the pressure, so he thinks they are controlled from elsewhere, regardless of whether it's from Mars, Venus, or our own planet. Okay. So in the midst of the 1947 flying saucer craze, after hundreds of people have reportedly seen flying saucers, Kenneth Arnold, the original citer of the original flying saucers, is saying on July 7th, 1947, that if our government has any information about the origins of these flying saucers, then they should disclose at once where they're coming from and what they know. So there you have it, folks. UFO disclosure was born on July 7th, 1947, where Kenneth Arnold emphatically stated that these discs were certainly not of foreign origin. They didn't come from Operation Paperclip. Now, why is this important? Because disclosure began on July 7th. And then the very next day, what happened? July 8th, 1947, the Roswell incident. Interesting. The UFO disclosure began the day before the government supposedly captured a flying saucer. Ladies and gentlemen, in the business we call this priming. So, there's your origin story on flying saucers and the UFO disclosure movement. But it doesn't stop there. Oh no. Because I'm gonna take you even further back in time. Let's go back to 1938. Once again, tensions are high. World War II is in full effect, Pearl Harbor's just around the corner, and the US isn't involved yet. And Orson Welles is doing his radio dramatization of the War of the Worlds, which I should point out, there was no mention of flying saucers. The aliens were described as flying cylinders that sprouted legs, not flying saucers. Prior to 1947, Buck Rogers flew around in rocket ships, but flying saucers weren't a thing. So it's in the midst of this in 1938. Orson Welles is doing a dramatization of War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, acclaimed author, eugenicist, member of the Fabian Society, and writer of a book called The Goddamn New World Order that laid out a structure for a world government. You can't make this shit up. So, Orson Welles is doing the radio play of the War of the Worlds. You probably know the story. We should probably do a full episode on it. It deserves it. Nevertheless, people are going crazy, shooting at grain silos, mass hysteria, cats and dogs living together. So, people are on edge about an alien invasion from Mars. Now, we can go into another time about how organic all of that was. But let's check this out. Early psychological warfare research and the Rockefeller Foundation. The Rockefeller Foundation was the principal source for funding public opinion and psychological warfare research between the late 1930s and the end of World War II. With limited government and corporate interest or support of propaganda-related studies, most of the money for the research came from this powerful organization that recognized the importance of asserting and steering public opinion in the immediate pre-war years. Rockefeller philanthropic attention toward public opinion was twofold. One, to review and establish the psychological environment in the United States for anticipated U.S. involvement in the coming World War, and two, to wage a psychological warfare and suppress popular dissent in foreign countries, particularly Latin America. Recognizing how the Franklin Roosevelt administration was bogged down politically and less capable of planning for war in terms of domestic and foreign propaganda efforts, Rockefeller Foundation funded projects and research institutes were established at Princeton University, Stanford University, and the New School for Social Research to monitor and analyze shortwave radio transmissions from abroad. The founding fathers of mass communication research could not have established their field without Rockefeller largesse. Alongside World War I propagandist and University of Chicago political scientist Harold Lasswell, psychologist Hadley Cantrell was a principal contributor to the knowledge and information that helped propel Rockefeller-controlled enterprises in American empire in the post-war era. Throughout this period, Cantrell provided the Rockefeller Combine with important information and new techniques in public opinion measurement and management in Europe, Latin America, and the United States. A roommate of Nelson Rockefeller's at Dartmouth College in the late 1920s, Cantrell took a doctorate in psychology at Harvard, co-authoring The Psychology of Radio with his doctoral mentor Gordon Allport in 1935. quote, radio is an altogether novel medium of communication, Cantrell and Allport observed, preeminent as a means of social control and epochal in its influence upon the mental horizons of men. The work garnered the attention of the Rockefeller Foundation Humanities Division, Officer John Marshall, commissioned by the foundation with convincing commercial broadcasters to include more educational programming into their advertiser-driven schedules. To this end, Rockefeller was funding fellowships at CBS and NBC broadcasting networks. Aware of the Dartmouth connection, Marshall encouraged the enterprising Cantrell to apply to the Foundation for support. Cantrell's request resulted in a $67,000 grant for a 2-year charter of the Princeton Radio Project at Princeton University. There, Cantrell proceeded to develop studies assessing radio's effects on audiences. In 1938, Cantrell also became a founding editor of Rockefeller Foundation-funded Public Opinion Quarterly, an organ closely associated with U.S. government psychological warfare endeavors following World War II. When the Princeton venture commenced, another trained psychologist close to Rockefeller, CBS Director of Research Frank Stanton, was named PRP lead researcher, but took a secondary role of associate director due to his position at the broadcast network. At this time, Austrian emigre social scientist Paul Lazarsfeld was recruited to join Cantrell. Thus, Cantrell, Stanton, and Lazarsfeld were closely associated and ideally positioned to embark on a major study involving public opinion and persuasion. The opportunity for such analysis presented itself when CBS broadcast Orson Welles' rendering of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds on October 30th, 1938. Lazarsfeld saw the event as especially noteworthy and immediately asked Stanton for CBS funds to investigate reaction to what at the time was the largest immediate act of mass persuasion in human history. Over the next several months, interviews with War of the Worlds listeners were collected, provided to Stanton at CBS, and subsequently analyzed in Cantrell's 1940 study, The Invasion from Mars, a study in the psychology of panic. Well, there you go, guys. So there's a link tangentially between the Rockefellers, CBS Broadcasting, Orson Welles' War of the Worlds, and U.S. studies in psychological warfare. But I'm sure that the Rockefellers had no interest in UFOs or aliens or anything of the sort after that, right? I'm sure that they had better things to do with their wealth. Oh, look at that. The Rockefellers financed the largest study into crop circles. I think there might be more to this. Let's find out.
Throughout most of the 1990s, a significant amount of UFO-related research was funded by the billionaire philanthropist Lawrence S. Rockefeller. Yet, with a few exceptions, this was mostly unknown by the general public, the media, and even the majority of the ufological community. It was also ignored by the mainstream world, who chose to ignore the unconventional side of one of the Rockefellers. His long official biography posted online by the Rockefeller Archive Center doesn't mention any of his UFO, paranormal, New Age, and consciousness-oriented interests, and neither did the long obituaries published by the New York Times, the Washington Post, and other mainstream publications when he died in 2004 at the age of 94. And yet, these activities were not small, inconsequential part of the philanthropist's life. He seemed to have spent quite a bit of time thinking, meeting people, and funding research in the period going from the late 1980s to 2000. Without access to his financial records, there's no way of knowing how much money he spent, but it must be around a few $1 million at the least. Although I never met him personally, I know something about it because I had the opportunity of working firsthand in one of Lawrence Rockefeller's sponsored projects, the UFO briefing document, The Best Available Evidence, a special report published in December 1995, sent to the White House, selected members of Congress, and VIPs, which is now available for free at the openminds.tv website.
So, up until the 1990s, Lawrence Rockefeller, which if you're keeping score at home, it's John D. Rockefeller, then John D. Rockefeller Jr., and then Lawrence David and Nelson Rockefeller. So Lawrence Rockefeller was funding the majority of UFO-related research up until his death in the 1990s. It turns out Rockefeller was financially supporting CUFOS, the Center for UFO Studies, FUFOR, the Fund for UFO Research, and MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network.
Rockefeller's activities, in fact, went beyond funding into actual lobbying at the highest level. President Bill Clinton and the First Lady and current Secretary, well, no longer current Secretary of State, Hillary Rodham Clinton. Long before the term exopolitics was in vogue, Lawrence Rockefeller was practicing it in the White House from 1993 to 1996. This has come to be known as the Rockefeller UFO Initiative, a multi-pronged campaign to get the US government to release sensitive information on UFOs and extraterrestrial intelligence. The initiative is documented in hundreds of pages of correspondence released a few years ago by the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, OSTP, under the Freedom of Information Act. These documents can be accessed at the Paradigm Research Group website. And also, of course, Grant Cameron has obtained lots of additional documents. I'm enclosing a long article describing all the various facets of the so-called Lawrence Rockefeller UFO Initiative, published in the Open Minds magazine, number 6, February-March 2011. It is not necessary to go into the biographical background of Mr. Rockefeller in this short presentation, except to note that he was one of the original grandsons of the founder of the dynasty, John D. Rockefeller, that he was obviously extremely wealthy and well-connected, that he had studied philosophy at Princeton and was quite a visionary even in business, where he seemed to be always ahead of the curve, backing aeronautics in the 30s,
Go figure.
electronics in the 60s, and conservation and environmental efforts throughout his long career. Although the mainstream media chose to ignore it, his intense interest in UFOs and ET issues in the 90s fits very well this pattern.
As I explained this morning, my name is Grant Cameron. I'm a private investigator for 38 years. I've spent most of my time looking at what the highest levels of U.S. government, military, and intelligence agencies know about the UFO phenomena. This afternoon, speaking about the Rockefeller Initiative, my testimony is based on 1,000 pages of documents that were released to me in 2001 by the Clinton White House in response to an FOIA for UFO files. It should be noted here that, like the documents you were talking about this morning, the Roswell documents that disappeared, these documents have now disappeared. Both the National Archives and the Clinton Library both maintain they do not have the documents. For example, I filed an FOIA with the Clinton Library I received about 1,000 pages of UFO documents, which included an awful lot of material that Stephen Greer had said to the president. The 1,000 pages that I'm going to talk about right now were not part of the disclosure, and both maintain that they don't have them. They are on my website, the President's UFO website, and Paradigm Research Group has these 1,000 pages of documents from the Clinton White House. Basically what the documents show, these FOIA documents show that billionaire businessman Lawrence Rockefeller had approached the White House to get the government to disclose the truth behind the UFO mystery. There was different Rockefellers. There's Nelson Rockefeller, who was the political guy who ran for government. There was David, who was the money guy. And Lawrence Rockefeller was the sort of humanitarian, had a philosophy degree from Princeton, and was very interested in this phenomena. Rockefeller also had other meetings outside the White House. One example was with Republican Stephen Horn, Republican from California, from the Government Reform and Oversight Committee related to government secrecy. Rockefeller's request for UFO disclosure was dealt with in the White House by the President's science advisor, Dr. Jack Gibbons. To prepare for the first meeting in March of 1993 with Rockefeller, Dr. Gibbons requested a UFO briefing from the CIA. That briefing was tasked at the CIA to Dr. Ronald Pandolfi. So if you want to know, that's probably the guy you should be phoning. Dr. Ronald Pandolfi, who's been identified by the New York Times as the top scientist in the CIA, and a man who is rumored inside the UFO community as the agency expert on UFOs, and a man that over the last 20 years has repeatedly interacted with many researchers inside the UFO community. As the CIA has a public position of no UFO involvement, Pandolfi gave the job of writing the White House briefing, which he knew would become public because Lawrence Rockefeller was involved. He gave that briefing job to a private UFO researcher, Mr. Bruce Maccabee, who had done a couple of UFO lunchtime talks at the CIA headquarters. The briefing therefore became not an official briefing on the subject, but just a personal opinion of one researcher inside the UFO community. Rockefeller exerted great pressure on the Clinton White House, threatening to write an open letter.
Threatening is a really strong word.
Demanding UFO disclosure from President Clinton, and to make this demand public in full-page ads in all the major newspapers in the United States. Under this pressure, Dr. Gibbons agreed to try to get some sort of disclosure on the UFO subject. He asked Mr. Rockefeller to pick one case that could be declassified, and then all the rest of the cover-up material could be dealt with. Mr. Rockefeller picked the 1947 UFO crash at Roswell as the case to investigate. And that is one of the reasons why there was a reinvestigation of the Roswell crash by the U.S. Air Force in 1994. The U.S. Air Force did not decide to do it on their own.
Interesting. So they didn't do it on their own. They did it at the behest of Lawrence Rockefeller, who wanted to look into the 1947 Roswell incident, which coincidentally, it's always by coincidence, happened the day after the UFO disclosure movement officially began. But nothing to see here, folks.
The little short statement, I'll try to keep it short. What I wanted to read was the fact that even though we're looking at a lot of secrecy, there was people inside the Clinton administration who actually did try to get this material out. They were trying to shake this. Bill Clinton, for example, had done some work with John Podesta. He actually, in 2005 in Hong Kong, Bill Clinton actually was talking about this in public. And he stated that the vast majority of the people in the Clinton administration believed the story of Area 51. They believed there was a live alien. They believed there was a craft underground. And that Bill Clinton actually went there to try to get to the bottom of this thing. And he stated in 2005, after mentioning this, he said, "I'm probably not the first president they kept in the dark, or that bureaucrats have tried to wait out." So Clinton tried to get to these materials. He told Paul Davids, who is the guy who produced the Roswell movie in 1997, Paul Davids had a short 5-minute conversation with Bill Clinton, and he told Bill Clinton that he was fascinated with the subject of UFOs. And he was very interested in the latest Roswell book that had come out that was given to him at that time. And Bill Clinton had actually, as we look back in the files, Bill Clinton had actually given a job to Webster Hubbell. In the job, he said to Webster, according to Webster Hubbell's book, Friends in High Places, 1997, Hubbell said that Bill told him, if I put you over there in justice, I want you to find out the answer to two questions. Number one, are there UFOs? And number two, who killed JFK? So Bill Clinton was a guy who didn't believe the official stories of the UFO or of the JFK stuff, and he actually sent someone to try to get the answers to this material. One of Bill Clinton's main, this is sort of being overlooked here, one of Bill Clinton's main allies in this effort to try to get material, it was John Podesta. And he and John Podesta actually did try to get a lot of classified material out into the public. It was the Executive Order 12958, which was signed in 1995, and it introduced a 25-year rule which hoped to bring to light many hidden secrets inside government, like the UFO issue. What was sought was a proper balance of openness in government versus what Podesta called unthinking secrecy. Podesta stated, our founders knew that democracy cannot function in the absence of public information. He noted the importance of balancing the vital interests of national security with the genuine claims of public openness. For 2 centuries, we have prospered and won in the United States because, at our best, we have found a way to do both. So to achieve this, they signed the executive order, which said that anything that was over 25 years old had to be declassified except in extreme circumstances. What basically happened was that between 1995 and 2000, the Clinton administration was able to declassify 800 million pages of documents, compared to 188 million pages in the previous 15 years. Unfortunately, the sought-after UFO documents that the Clintons wanted released with this material never materialized. And then in 2002, Podesta, who went on to work for the Obama administration, stated in a public statement at a sci-fi conference, I think it's time to open the books on the questions that have remained in the dark, on the questions of government investigations of UFOs. We ought to do it because it's right. We ought to do it because the American people can handle the truth, and we ought to do it because it's the law.
American hero John Podesta. Jesus Christ. Wednesday, October 23rd, 2002. Las Vegas Review-Journal. Podesta urges airing of Area 51. Washington. The federal government should conduct a review of what information could be made public about the top-secret Area 51 airbase in Nevada. Former White House Chief of Staff John Podesta said Tuesday. Podesta, who served as President Clinton's Chief of Staff from October 1998 through January 2001, said he was not at liberty to discuss all he knows about Area 51 because of a lawsuit by former workers who say they were injured when they inhaled toxic chemicals burned at the secret base. Other than confirming the existence of a classified installation, the government refuses to disclose details about Area 51, which is located in Dry Groom Lake bed 90 miles north of Las Vegas. Information about the base is withheld under presidential order, citing national security concerns. Quote, my tendency is to try to err on the side of openness, rather than the side of secrecy. We wouldn't want that. And I think a thorough review about whether more information could be brought to light about Area 51 would be a worthwhile enterprise, Podesta said. Podesta appeared at a news conference to support efforts by a group including the Sci-Fi Cable television channel to obtain government records on unidentified flying objects. Sci-Fi Channel President Bonnie Hammer said credible scientists have concluded that 5 to 10% of UFO reports cannot be explained by natural or artificial causes. quote, "I think it's time to open the books on questions that have remained in the dark on the question of government investigations of UFOs." Asked if he was aware of any information to suggest Area 51 harbors government information about UFOs, Podesta said, "I can answer that no." Podesta noted Clinton signed an executive order in 1995 that led to the declassification of 800 million pages of government documents over the next 5 years. In the 15 years prior to Clinton's order, 188 million pages of government documents were declassified, Podesta said. Podesta acknowledged Clinton also signed executive orders to prevent the release of information about Area 51. Interesting. Okay. So we've got the Rockefellers, we've got the Clintons, we've got John Podesta. Sounds legit. All right. So why? Why are the Clintons so interested in UFOs? Why does Bill Clinton want to get to the bottom of Area 51 instead of getting to the bottom of an intern? Well,
without any official record of the event, Lawrence Rockefeller did sit down with Bill and Hillary Clinton, and most of those documents were provided for by Stephen Greer, who provided them to Lawrence Rockefeller. They met at the Wyoming JY Ranch, which was controlled by the Rockefellers. Rockefeller briefed both Bill and Hillary Clinton on the best available evidence for UFOs and for the need to make that information available to the American people. The mention of Hillary's name in the 1995 briefing at the Rockefeller Ranch is important because the Rockefeller Initiative documents that I recovered show that Hillary played a key role in the Rockefeller White House Initiative on UFOs. There are two key documents. In November the 1st, 1995, there's a letter from Rockefeller's lawyer to the president's science advisor, and in that it points out that Hillary and her staff have been helping Lawrence Rockefeller edit a letter of UFO disclosure to the president. The letter was called Lifting Secrecy of Information About Extraterrestrial Intelligence as part of the current classification review. And what was happening was Lawrence was sending this document to various people, and he would threaten to send the letter to the president if he didn't get cooperation.
Again, this word threaten. There's a lot to unpack just in this little bit. I need to finish this video, but real quick, that's Stephen Greer. We haven't gotten to him. There's a whole section that I couldn't include because I don't have time. Project Starlight, look into that. That's a thread to pull on. Stephen Greer's the one who also, may I note, made the statement that UFOs are a bigger threat to the United States than China.
And various people helped him edit the letter. Hillary was one of the people who helped edit this letter on UFO disclosure. In a second 1996 letter from Rockefeller to the president's science advisor, in the letter he clearly spells out the information that is coming from Rockefeller to the science advisor to President Clinton, and from President Clinton's science advisor to Rockefeller. All that material is going through Hillary Clinton's First Lady's office.
Interesting. So there was a private meeting between Lawrence Rockefeller and the Clintons where Hillary Clinton helped Lawrence Rockefeller pen a letter that was sent to multiple people within the science and political community. But I'm sure this is all just conjecture. There's no evidence that any of this actually happened, right? Except, There's the Clintons at Lawrence Rockefeller's Wyoming ranch. Can we stop and take a moment away from all of the madness and try and appreciate what kind of food do they have at a Rockefeller ranch meeting? Let's take a look. So we got Bill. Bill looks like he went for seconds already. Fucking stacked up that plate with mashed taters and baby back ribs. And I do mean baby. Then we got Chelsea. All carbs. All carbs. Potatoes, bread, carrots, and peas. Then we got Hillary. She's just got coleslaw. Just coleslaw. Now you know she's got hot sauce in her purse. So she's gonna spice that up a little. Also, there's like daughter that nobody ever talks about. But I'm sure that no, this just comes from a different Lawrence Rockefeller's ranch, right, Spirit? Oh, look. There's Hillary Clinton taking a leisurely stroll with a decrepit Lawrence Rockefeller. There they are, just walking across a nice little bridge. Why, what is that Miss Clinton is holding in her arms? What is she clutching to her bosom? Enhance. Oh. Interesting. I lost my place. Hold on. Enhance. Oh. Why, a close-up of the book that Mrs. Clinton is carrying is Are We Alone? Philosophical Implications of the Discovery of Extraterrestrial Life by Paul Davies. And to her by Lawrence Rockefeller. Oh, look. There's Lawrence Rockefeller and Bill Clinton in the Oval Office. Take note of the seashell patterns. That'll come up again when we do the episode Symbols of Luciferianism. But I digress. Rockefeller tells Clinton to tell all about UFOs. New York Daily News, August 24th, 1995. President Clinton is being pressured to reopen super secret government files on the world's most baffling UFO incident. The man who wants the secrecy ended is billionaire philanthropist Lawrence S. Rockefeller, a personal friend of the president. There's a theory about Barbara Bush being the daughter of Aleister Crowley. Citation needed. I'm going to conjecture it is equally probable that Bill Clinton might be a bastard son of one of the Rockefellers. I'm just saying, he really looks like one. UFO experts believe the government covered up a UFO crash in 1947 near Roswell, New Mexico, from which alien bodies were recovered. This mystery was the basis of a highly rated show on the Fox television network, which was repeated September 5th. Quote, Many are convinced that Roswell marks the beginning of government secret about UFOs. Isn't it interesting that disclosure movement happened the day before? But I digress, says Rockefeller. In a letter to the White House obtained through the Freedom of Information Act, quote, whatever the truth of Roswell, a definitive statement about it from the government would be very important, the letter continues. Rockefeller hosted President Clinton at his Western Ranch during the chief executive's recent vacation in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and insiders believe he bent Clinton's ear about the UFO issue. I'm sure he bent more than his ear. He also wrote to President Clinton's science advisor, John Gibbons, to urge all UFO-related information be released. UFO enthusiasts have long cited the Roswell incident as the most blatant example of a government cover-up. They claim that after an alien spacecraft crash, the bodies of the ET visitors were autopsied and then secretly flown to an Air Force base in Ohio. In his letter to the White House, Rockefeller suggests that a cover-up may very well have been imposed by jittery bureaucrats. Quote, while much in the public sector has been written about it, the government has had nothing to say about it, says Rockefeller. He called on the president to promise there would be no persecution for those coming forward and revealing their eyewitness accounts of the New Mexico incident. Quote, in addition to lifting classification about Roswell, consideration should be given to granting amnesty on an individual basis to allow those with knowledge about the incident to speak without fear of prosecution. There is a reason to believe that there are individuals who would provide information about the incident under that circumstance. The Roswell incident has been repeatedly dismissed by the Defense Department. Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton recently made unusual comments regarding the existence of extraterrestrials during an editorial board meeting with New Hampshire's Conway Daily Sun. Quote, yes, I am going to get to the bottom of it, said Miss Clinton when questioned on the subject. I think we may have been visited already. We don't know for sure. Miss Clinton also indicated that her campaign chairman, John Podesta, had great interest in the UFO phenomenon. Quote, he has made me personally pledge we are going to get the information, said Miss Clinton, one way or another. Maybe we could have, like, a task force go to Area 51. That's a quote. Mr. Podesta, who served as chief of staff to President Bill Clinton and advisor to President Barack Obama, has spoken publicly about the issue in the past. Quote, it's time to open the books on questions that have remained in the dark on the question of government investigations of UFOs. It's time to find out what the truth really is that's out there, said Mr. Podesta during a news conference at the National Press Club on 2002. Quote, we ought to do it, really, because it's right, because the American people can, quite frankly, handle the truth, and we ought to do it because it's the law. Law-abiding citizen John Podesta. So Hillary Clinton helped Lawrence Rockefeller pen this letter that was sent out to multiple people within the scientific and political community. Oh, look. Here's a copy of one such letter. Sent to none other than Carl Sagan. Here's where it gets really down the rabbit hole. Dear Mr. Sagan, your letter to Dr. Tartar on October 2nd has found its way to my desk, and I am delighted that you are available to continue a dialogue. Blah, 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 blah. We continue to share your interest in assessing the probability of extraterrestrial intelligence. We believe that while the approach through radio telescope inquiry might prove useful, other inquiries might be productive as well. Now, for those of you that don't know, that don't follow this stuff, when he's talking about radio telescope inquiry, specifically he's talking about SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, where they have been searching for signs of extraterrestrial life through radio signals. So Lawrence Rockefeller's telling Carl Sagan, hey bud, you and I both know the SETI stuff's all bullshit. Okay? Put a pin in that. As you well know, there is substantial anecdotal evidence on the existence of ETI and UFOs, and little to no evidence of radio signals. Thus, we believe other avenues are worthy of serious scientific inquiry. As you suggest, we shall reread your UFO views in the demon-haunted world with interest, and hope to have the pleasure and privilege of future conversations. Sincerely, Lawrence S. Rockefeller. Hey, I even got Carl Sagan's reply. Check this out. Mr. Lawrence S. Rockefeller, thank you for your recent letter. My view is that no amount of anecdotal evidence, unsubstantiated by physical evidence, is worth a single substantive bit of physical evidence. A million reports that the Earth is flat has no vertical value on the shape of the Earth. With best wishes, cordially, Carl Sagan. God damn, that's verbose. Okay, so, but I want you to put in your back pocket that Lawrence Rockefeller is not only writing politicians and science people with UFO stuff, he's really denigrating the research that SETI is doing. Okay? So during the Clinton administration, abruptly, the SETI program gets defunded. On Columbus Day, 1992, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration formally initiated a radio astronomy program called SETI. Less than a year later, Congress abruptly canceled the program. Why? I think we know why. While there was and still is a debate over the likelihood of finding intelligent extraterrestrial life, virtually all informed parties agreed that the SETI program constituted worthwhile, valid science. Yet fervor over the federal budget deficit, lack of support from other scientists and aerospace contractors, and a significant history of unfounded associations with non-scientific elements, combined with bad timing in the fall of 1993, to make the program an easy target to eliminate. Thus, SETI was a relative anomaly in terms of a small, scientifically valid program that was canceled for political expediency. It seems like the SETI Institute were not fans of the Clintons. What Hillary Clinton says about aliens is totally misguided. Clinton, it seems, has at least 1 foot inside the UFO space wagon, and in recent weeks has promised to get to the bottom of what's really going on at Area 51. She says that if she's elected in November, she'll open up as many of those documents as she can and reveal the truth about possible extraterrestrial visits to Earth. Meanwhile, John Podesta, her campaign chair, appears to be piloting that space wagon. A rabid X-Files fan. Podesta tweeted, quote, "Finally, my biggest failure of 2014, once again, not securing the disclosure of the UFO files, hashtag, the truth is still out there." That was his biggest failure in 2014. It's disappointing that influential people are helping fan the flames of conspiracy theories that refuse to wilt beneath the weight of truth. One hopes it's just a campaign stunt meant to increase Clinton's popularity among a group of people who might be inclined to vote somewhat more conservatively. Yet given Podesta and Clinton's track records on the topic, it seems more likely the pair really believes there might be something to expose. Perhaps those documents are tucked into a cardboard box stashed away in an old railway car, waiting for Clinton and Podesta to arrive with their flashlights. But I'd wager, much more than my house, that there's exactly 0 credible evidence supporting alien encounters with this planet. And I'd love for warp drives and battle stars to exist as much as anyone would. Why is this important, you ask? It's probably not. But you know that submarine? One of the guys. What did he do again? Oh, that's right. He was a board of trustee for the SETI Institute. I don't know. Perhaps he had information on Hillary Clinton.
The second point has to do with the Rockefeller Initiative. I invite all of the political media, all media in general, but certainly the political media, to look at the Rockefeller Initiative. It is one of the great stories in American history. It's one of the great political stories, certainly of this or any other time. It is filled with amazing people who are still around and still very powerful. At the time that Rockefeller approached, through his attorney, President Clinton, Clinton's one of his very key advisors was John Podesta. The chief of staff at the time was Leon Panetta. The wife of the president at the time was Hillary Clinton. A good friend of the family at the time, soon to be Clinton's Secretary of Energy, was Bill Richardson. And this event went on, or this initiative went on for 6 years. The press completely ignored it, as if, what's the news there? It's just a billionaire Rockefeller trying to get the president to release all the files on this phenomena, possibly put a letter into every newspaper in the country and release, and basically, and the truth embargo. There's no news there. On the other hand, when the First Lady Hillary Clinton decided to do a little role-playing regarding Eleanor Roosevelt, just to kind of get a sense of what it was like to be First Lady, the press went apoplectic. That was news. In the 20 years that's followed, what has happened? Well, Leon Panetta, the chief of staff, who was fully aware of the Rockefeller Initiative the entire time it went on, became the Secretary of Defense and then the CIA director under President Obama. The wife of the president, Hillary Clinton, who was fully aware of the Rockefeller Initiative, went on to become Secretary of State and almost the President of the United States. John Podesta went on to become his chief of staff, and then in 2002, in a room just on the other hall I was attending, is when he made the announcement that Grant Cameron talked about, calling for the release of all the UFO files out of nowhere. I was there to watch the launch of the Coalition of Freedom of Information, which was kind of a mainstream attempt to look at this issue. I knew it was mainstream, and so when he showed up, I wasn't too surprised. But then when he made that statement, I said, what is going on here? A former chief of staff of a president and an advisor to a president has just called for the release of all files because the people have the right to know, and it's the law? And I said, well, there'll be 1,000 press trucks in front of his house tomorrow. Didn't happen. A year later, he came back and said it again, 2003. And then 6 months after he did that is when Bill Richardson wrote a foreword to a book called the Roswell Dig Diaries, where he basically said the Air Force explanation for Roswell was incorrect. Right? About the same time as when Stephen Schiff was doing his efforts to try to find out the truth, and Colonel Philip Corso came forward with extraordinary revelations about his involvement with the Roswell technology. And the press still didn't see the news quite yet. President Obama appointed Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State, but what was the most notable thing to me is one of the most important jobs that he had to choose as the new President of the United States was the person that was going to help form the new government that he was about to launch. And the person he chose as the co-chair, but the principal chair of his transition committee, was the man who called for the release of all the UFO files in 2000 and 2003, John Podesta. But when they lost the election in 2004, went silent. And I can tell you, there is an unbelievable political story that has never been told that exists between the moment that Rockefeller turns up in Clinton's Office of Science and Technology Policy and the election of Barack Obama and the selection of all the people that knew about the Rockefeller Initiative right into the administration, including Bill Richardson, who they tried to make the Secretary of Commerce. These connections are too extraordinary to be accidental. I believe that the story the press could find, which is just dripping with Pulitzer Prizes, is the fact that the Democratic Party at some level made the decision that they were going to be the disclosure party. It should have gone to George H.W. Bush, the perfect, quote, disclosure president from the standpoint of the military intelligence complex. But the Cold War ended in the middle of his term. There was a war in the Middle East. It wasn't quite something you could just do, but he was the guy. He has a resume, it looks like a phone book. But he lost the election. He lost the election to an unknown man from Arkansas with a rather unusual history, who was a draft dodger in their mind and a womanizer in their mind, and they hated him. They hated him so much that officers were insulting him in front of the troops and had to be sent letters that it's actually treason to do that. He could not be the disclosure president, and yet Rockefeller turns up at his door, and it goes from there all the way through there. There is a hidden backstory. And I would also say that the day that Rockefeller's attorney showed up in the office of this man that the military intelligence complex wanted nothing to do with, the alarm bells were going off all over the military intelligence world, in the basements and the darkest recesses of the underground facilities. Oh my God, Bill Clinton is going to be the disclosure president. And very shortly after Henry Diamond appeared and the Rockefeller Initiative began, and I remember it quite well because I was living in Washington, it seemed like the entire universe collapsed down on this administration, and they came under every conceivable attack you can imagine from every direction. They went after mothers, dogs, cats, girlfriends, aunts, uncles, Travelgate, Troopergate, Pork Belly Gate, and it never stopped until he was impeached. And I remember press saying, at the time, I was listening to him comment, this is back around, I would say 1995, 6, 7. I remember press saying, you know, the president has his problems and clearly he makes mistakes, but I don't get it. What is going on here? What is this endless attack on this man and his wife and everything else? Why are they bottling him up so much? He's doing such a great job. He's got a great approval rating, but they're coming at him. There may be a reason that the press doesn't understand that Bill Clinton could potentially have been the disclosure president, and that wasn't acceptable, and he had to go. And when he won again, they became even more concerned, and so it goes. And then eventually Barack Obama becomes the president and brings all of those people from that time back to do what? Well, we don't know. What their major plans might have been were squashed because just a few weeks before the election itself, the entire economy essentially collapsed or was about to collapse because some people decided when they left the building they would take all the money with them. And his administration was completely tied up ever since. So there is this amazing backstory to all of this that if some really tough reporters who like to ask tough questions, the Woodward and Bernsteins of our era, if there are any left, get out there and start asking those questions, I tell you, it's going to be very, very interesting. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Yeah. This is coming from people who support them. It was the mean old press going after Bill Clinton because he was the UFO disclosure president, guys. That's what happened. And I'm sure that the press, the mean old press, never talked about UFOs ever again. And I'm sure that the Clintons and and John Podesta, I'm sure that they all got the message, right? And they all just quit talking about it after that, right?
That's a legitimate question now. And the short answer, but not the most meaningful one, is I don't know about this. But when I was president and I had a chief of staff, John Podesta, who loved science fiction, we made every attempt to find out everything about Roswell. And we also sent people to Area 51 to make sure there were no aliens in a deep because Area 51 is very important.
Who do you send to Area 51?
Oh, if I told you that.
They're laughing about being able to murder you. No.
Do you think there might be aliens?
I'm actually, I think there are two issues there. One is, are there aliens? And two, have we been visited or visited recently by aliens? Right. I think on the former, it seems inconceivable there aren't aliens. Right. On the latter, you know, that's what the quest for opening up and you know, getting the government to take it seriously. Other governments have done so. Mm-hmm. They've both looked and reviewed their files. They've set up, you know, these are small teams of people to say, okay, well, if we see something, let's examine it. Let's rather than being embarrassed, ashamed, and treating it as something that has to go into black programs everywhere. Let's let the public in on what we know. But that's all I've championed, and I stand by it. And I think it would be good. And I think there's actually a lot of public interest in the phenomena in doing that. And I got to tell you, I meet a lot of politicians, people in Washington, and others who say, I'm with you, but I can't say so.
But you were filing tonight in the race for president. One candidate is fighting hard for a rare demographic, UFO enthusiasts. Recent comments on opening up the X-Files and the mysterious Area 51 have some calling this politician the ET candidate.
As Hillary Clinton told the Breakfast Club radio show.
Now, if you become president, are you really going to tell the truth about UFOs?
I have said I want to open the files as much as we can. But there are enough stories out there that I don't think everybody is just sitting, you know, in their kitchen making them up.
She's talking, of course, about the top secret files on whether space aliens are real.
If not conventional aircraft, then what did they see?
Did a UFO crash land in Roswell, New Mexico? And what's the truth about Area 51? Recently, when UFOs came up on Jimmy Kimmel, she corrected his terminology.
And you know, there's a new name. It's unexplained aerial phenomenon.
I know that there is information that has been collected by the U.S. government that has not been released to the public, And let the scientists debate what these phenomena are. We've now seen, as a result of reporting by the New York Times and others, the video evidence of these unidentified aerial phenomena. Let's put it out there, let people debate it.
Put it out there, let people debate it. Why not? Because spirit, I hear you say in your whiny voice, I'm with you. There is a demonstrative lineage between billionaire philanthropists, the Clintons, John Podesta, and UFO disclosure. So what? Why would billionaire philanthropists want there to be aliens? Why? How would they benefit from an alien invasion? Well, don't ask me. Ask Paul Krugman.
Think about World War II, right? That was actually negative social product spending, and yet it brought us out. I mean, partly because you want to put these things together. If we say, look, we could use some inflation. Ken and I are both saying that, which is, of course, anathema to a lot of people in Washington, but is in fact what the basic logic says. It's very hard to get inflation in a depressed economy, but if you had a program of government spending plus an expansionary policy by the Fed, you could get that. So if you think about using all of these things together, you could accomplish, a great deal. I mean, if we discovered that space aliens were planning to attack, and we needed a massive buildup to counter the space alien threat, and really inflation and budget deficits took secondary place to that, this slump would be over in 18 months. And then if we discovered, whoops, we made a mistake, there aren't actually any space aliens.
So we need Orson Welles, is what you're saying.
No, there was a Twilight Zone episode like this in which scientists fake an alien threat in order to achieve world peace. Well, this time we don't need it. We need it in order to get some fiscal stimulus.
These nations must unite. We must make them unite. I don't care what reading of history you take, the pattern is always the same. Whenever a bacteria invasion strikes, or a fire rages, or a wild beast roams the streets, then and only then do men stop fighting each other and work together to save themselves. A common enemy, a common fear, that is the only answer. If all the men of the earth are threatened by an enemy from a hostile planet, well, gentlemen, we are going to create that enemy.
What do we know? We know now we live in an ever-expanding universe. We know that there are billions of stars and planets literally out there, and the universe is getting bigger. We know from our fancy telescopes that just in the last 2 years, more than 20 planets have been identified outside our solar system that seem to be far enough away from their suns and dense enough that they might be able to support some form of life. So it makes it increasingly less likely that we're alone.
Oh, you're trying to give me a hint that there are aliens.
No, I'm trying to tell you I don't know.
Oh.
But if we were visited someday, I wouldn't be surprised. I just hope that it's not like Independence Day.
Yeah, right.
That it's a conflict.
Well, now we have friendly
Maybe the only way to unite this incredibly divided world of ours. They're out there. We better think of how all the differences among people on Earth would seem small if we felt threatened by a space invader. That's the whole theory of independence.
You're right. You're right.
Everybody gets together and makes nice, and
You and Bill O'Reilly would be hiding in a bunker together.
Oh, Bill O'Reilly, he'd every mean thing he ever said about me. That's the thing. I don't care. Look at that.
I think that people need to understand that the ETs are concerned about our hostility and our tendency to destroy the entire world. And they're here to help us, not to hurt us. They're here to assist and to understand, but they're not going to intervene. A lot of people say, well, why don't they just fly in? Larry King, he asked me when I was on his show, why don't they just land on the White House lawn? I said, well, first of all, if they did, they'd be blown up. And secondly, they're expecting us, the children of the earth, to come together in peace, to make contact with them and fix these problems. Because if they were to come in and force a solution, It would be like us invading Afghanistan, forcing the warlords to become democratic. It doesn't work. That has to come from within the people. We, the people, have to do it. We, the people, have to end all these big problems. It isn't enough to say we're all one people. We have to say we're all one universal people, because now we're dealing with intelligent life forms that aren't even human. Mm-hmm. So, and how do we transcend this tendency we all have to break into fighting little groups?
In our obsession with antagonisms of the moment, we often forget how much unites all the members of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bound. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us? What could be more alien to the universal aspirations of our peoples than war and the threat of war?
Not an alien threat already among us? What did he mean by that? Why did he choose those words? I'll let you ponder that while we take a break. And when we come back, we're gonna look at the Beatles. So stick around, everybody. There's gonna be witchcraft, there's gonna be kidnappings, mind control. So stick around. We'll be right back in about 3 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, if Romeo had seen this Juliet, he would never have taken poison. Ladies and gentlemen, Juliet Prowse.
Turn off your mind, relax and float downstream. It is not time.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Try and work on getting smoother transitions with the music. A little reminder, if you like what you see, you can help me out. I put a lot of effort into this. But this ain't no slouch stream. So if you like what you see, buymeacoffee.com/mooseheaven. You can join as a member over there. You get access to extra videos. You'll get an interview with Kenneth Arnold on his very first UFO sighting. You will get a very, very cleaned up version of an interview about the Beatles and the Tavistock Institute. It's going to be the cleanest version of that you're going to find on the internet. Because all the versions that are out there are unlistenable, but not this one. So if you join as a member, you'll get access to that. Also, a neat little documentary about John Lennon's assassin. Pretty interesting, and we're gonna touch on that and much, much more. buymeacoffee.com/mooseheaven. I hope you guys are enjoying the show so far. I know you guys are excited to hear about that Tavistock stuff. I don't know, there's something there. But without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles!
Ow! Now! The big question. The triplet. We all know about the triplet.
We all know about the triplet.
We know that the triplet represents 12-4.
And we all know, this is the classic Beatles sound.
That it represents 12-8 too. But you didn't know.
Oh, you didn't know.
That it represents the Purdy Shuffle.
Oh, the Purdy Shuffle.
And before we finish,
now, ladies
we're
and
going
gentlemen,
to do a little bit of that too.
This is Bernard Purdy.
And a good old-fashioned shuffle, we might do that at the end as well. But for the time being,
he's the inventor of the Purdy Shuffle. You know, that classic Beatles sound that we've all heard and loved.
This is a triplet. And it grooves like anything.
She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. She loves you, yeah, yeah,
One and one E and
come
two E and
together.
I like this part.
Strawberry
now,
fields forever.
Let's make that 12-8.
So you're saying to yourselves, Spirit, you've lost your goddamn mind. That's not the Beatles.
See?
Au contraire.
You didn't know you were doing it.
Au contraire.
12-8.
No, that's Ringo.
Yes.
That's Ringo.
It really is.
It really is. It's Ringo.
Now
you
we'll
didn't know that, did you?
move from center.
You didn't know that the real conspiracy isn't Paul is dead. It's that Ringo was a black man.
Now.
And you're saying, Spirit!
Now that we've got the 12-4
what are you
and the 12-8,
talking about?
I'm going to explain to you.
Well,
remember that word. Call explain.
Explain.
Not explain, but I'm going to explain to you what the Purdy Shuffle is all about.
He's going to explain, and I'm going to let him explain.
Because for me, up to this time that you're hearing this record now, for almost 12 to 15 years, I was being trained by engineers to fix records. including no.
I know what you're about to say.
I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say it.
I'm going to ask you about it. So
no.
yeah,
you got it. You just come on out and say it, man. Come on, man.
Talking. I'll do that. I'll do the question. Talking of fixing records, there's a rumor that nobody really ever confirmed that you may have fixed some of the Ringo Starr tracks for the Beatles. Okay, there was an answer.
The part that hurts, the real part that hurts, is that the people do not understand fixing records was a way of life. In the 60s and the 70s, it was a way of life fixing up records because 98% of the groups, self-contained groups, are not on their own albums. They are not on their own albums. And what I did and what I was doing was going in. I was one of the few drummers who could actually go in, join the group, and make the records. Because the record companies were paying a lot of money to make these records happen. My thing was, I got along with everybody, and I never went out and started hollering and complaining, no, that ain't so-and-so, so-and-so doing this, that, and the other. And I just did a job. The Beatles' music was just another job for me. Another job. Because half of the songs that I played on 21 tracks of the Beatles. Half of them had no drums. Because they kicked him out in the beginning. And the whole point is that whether you realize it or not, whether you want to believe it or not, it becomes irrelevant at this point. But you're going to find out that he's not on anything. The man made his money and everything else was made by live. The man spent $1 million promoting the Beatles. Brian Epstein spent money to promote the Beatles. And that was unheard of in the 60s, to spend that kind of money to do something. Ringo took somebody else's place in that band because that's who they wanted and that's who they could control. And that's all it was. It was all about control. He looked the part that they wanted. He was the one that he chose, and that's what they did. But the making of those records and the fixing of those records, 98% of them were first recorded early in England and brought to the United States to be done and fixed. That's why Mercury Records and Capitol Records, they both have Beatles albums. I did mine in the Capitol studio in New York City. I had no idea who the hell the Beatles were or anything else. I was doing a job. And that, for me, is the hardest thing because I've had my life threatened too many times. And at this point in my life, I don't care anymore. And it really doesn't bother me whether I talk about it or do anything else about it because I don't have to go back there or to deal with it in life anymore. And I'm very proud of that for my sake. What he did, he made his money, he did what he needed to do. He doesn't have to answer to anybody else for what he's done. And it's a shame to, for things to happen this way, but it did happen. And it has happened with too many other people. There are 4 drummers on the Beatles' music. Ringo is not one of them.
Wow.
Huh?
Wow.
That's. Hey, listen, it was a way of life.
It was a way of life. So what do you guys think? You believe Uncle Ringus? Did he play on 21 Beatles tracks? Was this the man behind the music? Well, Bernard Purdie has a pretty impressive record. He's played with a lot of artists, including Steely Dan. And what he's referring to is the Wrecking Crew method. Because he's not wrong. He's not wrong. A lot of those musicians couldn't play, and they would get session musicians to fill in. Not an unusual practice. But did he play with the Beatles? I don't know. Here's my theory. Spirit time. Ringo's drumming is very unique. It comes from the fact that he's left-handed and he plays right-handed. So he has a very unique style. If there's 4 different people who are all playing drums on the Beatles records, they would all have to imitate Ringo's particular irregularities. But Ringo wasn't the only drummer the Beatles had. Paul filled in on drums sometimes. Hey, look into who played drums on Dear Prudence. That's a rabbit hole. But I digress. So he talked about them throwing Ringo out of the band. Now, Beatle lore. They had Pete Best as their drummer, and they did throw him out. And they got Ringo. As far as looking the part and control, yeah, checks out. All the stuff he said about Epstein, yeah, we'll get into that in a minute. There is a variety of drummers on their first single, Love Me Do, which is not a very good song. But I believe there's 3 different versions. Pete Best, Ringo, and George Martin had Ringo sit out and had Andy White, who was a session drummer, sit in. So there's 3 different drummers on just that track, if you believe the official narrative. But how does Bernard Purdie work in? So early on in the Beatles' career, they're playing in Hamburg, Germany, and they get this gig backing this guy Tony Sheridan, who's like a minor rock and roll fucking guy in Germany, and they back him on this track, My Bonnie. And for some reason, they build him as Tony Sheridan and the Beat Brothers. So, armchair Beatle historian spirit here. I've heard 2 different versions of those recordings. One has Pete Best's very sloppy drumming, and another has some very spicy, one might say Bernard Purdie shuffly overdubs on top of it. Well, that's because to cash in on the Beatles' success, these recordings with Tony Sheridan were re-released, but they were kind of subpar recordings, and so at some point there was some spicing up of the tracks. definitely in the drum area. And it's definitely not Ringo. Conjecture, I think it's Bernard Purdie. So is there some truth that Bernard Purdie played on Beatle tracks? Yes and no. At least, that's my conjecture. But let's get on to another guy that a lot of people seem to think is the brains behind the Beatles. This guy. That's Theodor Adorno. He's a German-born philosopher, sociologist, psychologist, musicologist, and composer. He was one of the leading members of the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory, which I'm sure you all know now. It's associated with cultural Marxism. So you can look into Adorno. He is an interesting cat. His background is in avant-garde music. And he writes a lot about a 12-tone system of music. And he does write stuff about, you know, cultural revolution through music and stuff. So there's something there. There's something there. But most of Theodor Adorno's work in music has to do with like avant-garde stuff. I don't know. Let's hear out the theory first. So, as far as I can tell, this theory starts with this book. The Story of the Committee of 300, Spiriters' Hierarchy by John Coleman. You can get a full interview with John Coleman if you join as a member on Buy Me a Coffee. An outstanding example of social conditioning to accept change, even when it is recognized as unwelcome change by the large population group in the sites of Stanford Research Institute, was the advent of the Beatles. The Beatles were brought to the United States as part of a social experiment, which would subject large population groups to brainwashing, of which they were not even aware. Phenomena of the Beatles was not a spontaneous rebellion by youth against the old social system. Instead, it was a carefully crafted plot to introduce by a conspiratorial body which could not be identified, a highly destructive and divisive element into the large population group targeted for change against its will. New words and phrases prepared by Tavistock were introduced to America along with the Beatles. Words such as rock in relation to music sounds teenager, cool, discovered, and pop music were a lexicon of disguised code words signifying the acceptance of drugs. And they arrived with and accompanied the Beatles wherever they went to be discovered by teenagers. Incidentally, the word teenagers was never used until just before the Beatles arrived on the scene, courtesy of the Tavistock Institute for Human Relations. What's the Tavistock Institute that we keep hearing about? Well, The Tavistock Institute for Human Relations is a British non-profit organization. It was founded in 1947 with a significant grant from the Rockefeller Foundation. They were part of the British National Health Service. And they did do research into shell-shocked Army veterans. But that research went into, psychological warfare. So, again, there's something there. As in the case of gang wars, nothing could or would have been accomplished without the cooperation of the media, especially the electronic media, and in particular, the scurrilous Ed Sullivan, who had been coached by the conspirators as to the role he was to play. Nobody would have paid much attention to the motley crew from Liverpool and the 12-tone atonal system of music, quote unquote, that was to follow had it not been for an overabundance of press exposure. The 12 atonal system consisted of heavy repetitive sounds taken from the music of the cult of Dionysus and the Baal priesthood by Adorno and given a modern flavor by this special friend of the Queen of England, and hence the Committee of 300. Tavistock and its Stanford Research Center created trigger words, which then came into general usage around rock music and its fans. Trigger words created a distinct new breakaway, a largely young population group, which was persuaded by social engineering and conditioning to believe that the Beatles were really their favorite group. All trigger words, devised in the context of rock music, were designed for mass control of the new targeted group, the youth of America. Following the Beatles, who incidentally were put together by the Tavistock Institute, came other made-in-England rock groups who, like the Beatles, had Theo Adorno write their cult lyrics and compose all their music. I hate to use these beautiful words in the context of Beatlemania. It reminds me of how wrongly the word lover is used when referring to the filthy interaction between two homosexuals writhing in pig swill. To call rock music is an insult. Likewise, the language used in rock lyrics. Okay. There's something. And if you can't tell, I'm not a big proponent of this theory. I think Theodore Adorno is an interesting cat, and I think there's something there with the Tavistock Institute and social engineering. Wrote all the Beatles lyrics? Nah. Think about it. First of all, Theodore Adorno is not into pop music. He does this avant-garde 12 atonal system. And then if one cat is writing all of the Beatles lyrics, then that person has to create a writing style for John and for Paul and for George. because they all have a distinct style in their writing. Now, did the Beatles use ghostwriters? That's a whole other topic I won't get into. But suffice to say, I think Here, There, and Everywhere is an example of a song that I don't think they wrote. I think a lot of early Paul stuff is probably ghostwritten. It just kind of sounds that way, and they were on tour a lot, and they were cranking out like 3 albums a year. It's not an unheard of thing to use ghostwriters. So, I do believe that. As to whether or not they were a manufactured phenomena, well, that's where we get to Brian Epstein. So, Epstein's their manager. He comes from a happy merchant family who owns a lot of businesses. Wouldn't you know? And they put young Brian in charge of a record store. Now, Brian is very homosexual. One might say he has to hide his love away. So one day, he's working in this record store and somebody comes in. Coincidentally, looking for the Tony Sheridan recordings. They wanted to hear that sweet Bernard Purdie shuffle. And that's how Brian found out about the Beatles. So he goes to see them in the cavern. I won't get into a bunch of Beatle lore, but let's cut to the chase. Brian is very gay. And he is very attracted to the Beatles. Namely, John. Brian has a very strong attraction to John. And everybody's kind of aware of this. John kind of plays into it. I mean, is it that much different than what goes on nowadays? Nevertheless, there's always been some theories too about Brian buying up copies of Love Me Do because it's kind of a shit song. And that he kind of artificially created interest in them. It's pretty accepted at this point that when they came over to America, like a lot of the girls who were waiting at the airport screaming for them were paid from a girls' school. So there was manufacturing afoot. But I want to get back to the gay thing. John and Brian Epstein love affair on holiday. It was pretty intense. John Lennon had a desire to sleep with Ben, says Yoko Ono. We'll get to her, don't you worry. But what really happened on the holiday the Beatles legend took, alone with the manager Brian Epstein, who was homosexual, in April 1963, Lennon described it as a pretty intense relationship. Paul McCartney said his bandmate had ulterior motives for taking the trip. On April 28, 1963, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr jetted off on holiday to Santa Cruz, Tenerife, for a 12-gay getaway in Tenerife. One member of the band was missing. At the same time, in a move that sparked major rumors of a scandalous affair, John Lennon accepted an offer from Brian Epstein to travel with him to Barcelona. Incredibly, John's wife Cynthia had just given birth to their son Julian, but the star chose to leave his family and go be with his friend, quote unquote, picking up boys. Beatle himself admitted he was a bastard for doing it. By the time they came back from Spain, rumors were spreading that they were involved in a gay relationship. Good for them. In public comments, the star made light of what went on. But both his later wife, Yoko Ono, and his school friends said there was much more to it. Lennon himself said, "I'm gonna have to do the worst John Lennon impression ever to have nobody clip this. I watched Brian picking up the boys. I liked playing a bit faggy, all that. It was enjoyable. But there were big rumors in Liverpool. It was terrible, very embarrassing." Lennon told his former school friend Pete Shotton very different, explicit details of what happened in Spain. In his 1983 memoir, Shotton described how Lennon confessed something did happen with Epstein one night. The account is rather graphic, with Shotton saying Lennon told him, "What happened is that Eppy just kept on me until one night I finally just pulled me trousers down." Shotton says Lennon offered Epstein sex, but the other man apparently just wanted to touch, and they engaged in a minor sexual act. John gave him a handjob. Shotton explained that Lennon had felt sorry for Epstein and told him, "What harm did it do then? No harm at all. Poor fucking bastard, he can't help the way he is." Indeed, many think Lennon was inspired to write the song "Hide Your Love Away" by Epstein's life. Later, Lennon publicly said, "It was almost a love affair, but not quite. It was never consummated, but it was in a pretty intense relationship." McCartney has suggested instead that Lennon took the holiday as a power play, a way to make himself more important to Epstein than his bandmates. He said John was a smart cookie. Brian was gay, and John saw his opportunity to impress upon Mr. Epstein, who was the boss of the group. Oh shit. I don't know what that's doing in there. So the Beatles were provocateurs. They had Aleister Crowley on their albums. They were flirting with the occult, throwing up Eyes of Horus and Baphomets. Posing with dead babies and raw meat. And then, John sparks all this controversy. I'm sure you've heard about it. He says the Beatles are bigger than Jesus. That'll come up later. But what you didn't know, it comes from this particular little paperback here. I don't know if you can read the story that's above it, but, well, I'll just blow it up for you. So, they were definitely trying to stir up controversy. So, how much of that was manufactured? How much of it was genuine? I don't know. But I'll let you make up your own mind about that. As far as the Adorno stuff, if there's a connection to the Beatles, it comes through avant-garde music. Paul was very into avant-garde music. They were into like the scene. And avant-garde music is going to play a big factor in what we're about to talk about. Let's get to Yoko, because there's a lot to unpack here. First of all, let's talk about John and Yoko's relationship. John was completely dependent on her. She had control over all of his finances, who he got to socialize and talk to. That guy that was in the article earlier, Pete Schoten, John's childhood friend, Yoko just decided one night, you can't talk to him anymore. And John never talked to him again. And they were friends since like childhood. So Yoko had a lot of control, particularly over John. And she was part of this avant-garde thing. Now let's get this out of the way. You're gonna have to take my word for it. I can't get into the details. It's a whole other topic. Maybe we can cover it on another show. But avant-garde art has always had an intelligence aspect to it. During the Cold War, the excuse was that the CIA would funnel a bunch of money into avant-garde art as an example to the Russians, or at least to the American propaganda machine, that the US was more socially open than the Soviets, and allowed all of this experimental avant-garde art to exist. Meanwhile, they were completely trashing the culture and promoting degenerate art. We'll get to that, but let's talk about Yoko. So who is Yoko? Well, she comes from a very rich family. Her dad's an international banker. Huh. From a young age, she's already traveling between countries. What you're about to hear is a story of kidnapping and witchcraft. It gets wild. Strap in. That was a nice transition.
Born in 1933, she grew up in a Tokyo family of great power and wealth. Her parents, unusually for the time, had married for love. Her father, once a concert pianist, became an international banker. As the family shuttled between Japan and the United States, the swing from east to west became a way of life for Yoko.
This whole huge object actually may not be here. This whole show may not be here, you know, or I may not be here. Actually,
in 1957, Yoko married Toshi Ichiyanagi, a Japanese composer. 5 years later, she returned with him to Tokyo. While his work was acclaimed, hers was treated with disdain. Lonely and depressed, at the age of 29, Yoko tried to take her own life. Her husband and parents put her in a psychiatric hospital. She felt that no one was listening to her, until one day, a stranger turned up.
there was this one visitor that kept coming every day with flowers or something, and the nurses all fell in love with this guy. Said, "You must see this guy. He's so much in love with you." I said, "Oh, yes, okay, forget it. I don't want to see anybody, you know."
The visitor was Tony Cox, an American artist who'd admired Yoko's paintings back in New York and had come in search of her. Yoko was seduced and quickly left the hospital with him. Soon she was expecting Tony's child. Divorcing Toshi, she married Tony and in 1963 gave birth to a girl, Kyoko. Even from her early days as a performance artist, Yoko liked to shock. In a famous piece in the early 60s, she invited the audience to come up on stage and cut off her clothes.
People were tremendously rattled by it. And it was a very big thing to, step up there and take the scissors and so forth. And Yoko was astonishing. I mean, so brave, so bold, so cutting edge.
Yoko once told me, if half the audience doesn't get up and leave, she hasn't done it right. Because she wants to really get to people. She wants to really make them feel. But many people have those feelings hidden, and they get angry at Yoko for making them feel like that.
It's created by 365 behind.
Gallery. Here, in November 1966, she staged an exhibition of her work. The Beatles were known to hang out there, and on the night before the official opening, John Lennon dropped by. Soon, she and Lennon were inseparable, but Yoko's newfound happiness would not be welcomed by Beatles fans.
I just thought that it's nice for people to step on a painting and sort of make their natural mark.
No respect for art, then?
Well,
In 1968, Yoko Ono left her husband Tony and daughter Kyoko to live with John Lennon. He was 27, she was 35.
Hello. How is it? He was incredibly shy. Now, I know you're not going to believe this, but he was.
We'll make it jolly.
Yes, we have to make it jolly.
Why? We can't all afford to be neurotic.
Jolly, maybe we might stop the war.
By being jolly?
Yes, because the thing is, have you ever seen a person killing somebody with a smile on his face and being happy? No, killers are unhappy people. And they're violent because they're so unhappy and so damn serious.
Mrs. Lennon, we're boring each other, so I'll go.
To you about that?
Thank you. Goodbye.
I was fiercely independent kind of person. I didn't like the idea of getting married to anybody. And if I were to be married, I like the idea that I'm the one who's the earner. Well, control freak, you can say control freak, But basically, I just didn't want any of it, really.
In 1971, Tony took Kyoko into hiding. The Lennons tracked them down to Mallorca, where they were staying with the Beatles' former guru, the Maharishi. Yoko was determined to get her daughter back.
Oh, well, we tried to kidnap her. which was a totally wrong thing to do, of course. And she started screaming.
The Lennons were taken to court for attempted abduction. A custody battle ensued. The judge asked Yoko which of her parents she wanted to live with. She chose Tony.
I was not mean to her or abusive to her, but ignoring might be considered abusive in a way, of course. Or getting married to somebody else might be considered abusive.
Within months, Tony and Kyoko disappeared again. Yoko began a new search, but she wouldn't see her daughter for 25 years.
And I don't want to do anything to harm her or hurt her. I don't want to cause any panic.
So not for somebody to come, bring out the child or something. We don't want any of that jazz. We'd like to just somebody find where she is, and then we'll do the rest.
We did the Ouija board to try and find clues, because nobody could find a trace of Tony and Kyoko. So Yoko tried other methods, spiritual ways, to try and get a clue of where they could possibly be.
In her search for her daughter, Yoko discovered a new source of power. The occult became a vital part of her life for the next decade. It made people even more suspicious of her.
John was fascinated by her. Most people, even those who couldn't stand her, were fascinated and mystified by her. And she could call upon a certain type of intuition, a certain kind of, I'm going to use the phrase, people always get uptight about this stuff, but a certain kind of mystical knowledge, as if she was tapping into certain sources of information beyond the kind of stuff that we do.
I didn't really know who she was, even though she told me her name. And I know it sounds crazy, but it's like when she said John, I said to her something about, I get a man in your life, I get initial J. And she said, that's my husband, John. And she kept looking at me like I was a little nuts. And even when she said John Lennon, I had to think who she's talking about. But at the end, something happened, something triggered off in me. And I looked at her and I said, wait a minute, I don't think your husband has a happy ending. And she said, what do you mean? And I'll never forget, and I could see like a man's chest, and said, it's like he sleeps in blood. That's what I told her.
9/11, never forget. All right, so there's a lot to unpack with Yoko. Kidnapping, but I want to focus on one thing that they kind of touched on, and that's her involvement in avant-garde art. If there's any connection to Theodore Adorno, the stronger person to have that link would be Yoko Ono, because she was working with all of the same people, John Cage, all of that. But she was also working with an avant-garde group called Fluxus. And that's a whole other story. And they touched on it a little bit, but let's go into this Fluxus thing.
One artist who was heavily involved in the Fluxus movement was Yoko Ono. Born in Tokyo, Japan in 1933, Yoko Ono was later brought to New York with her parents, where she studied at Sarah Lawrence College. There, she began creating instructional pieces. These were pieces that could be performed by anyone, anywhere, and captured the essence of flux art. Ono liked to harness what was already present in the world. She also liked to focus on the physical body within her artwork. One performance piece featured in this exhibit is Cut Piece, performed by Yoko Ono in 1964. In this performance, audience participation was required. Yoko Ono presented herself on center stage, sat down with her legs underneath her, placed large scissors in front of herself, and instructed the audience to come up one by one, cut off a piece of her clothing, and take it with them. After instructing the audience on what to do, she remained silent for the rest of the piece. Her posture for the performance consisted of her sitting on her knees with her legs tucked under. This posture is known as seiza, which is a formal or respectful sitting position within the Japanese culture. Throughout the piece, she sat quietly as the audience cut off her clothing. The performance ended when she decided, which was usually around the time the cutting had stopped. Cut piece has been performed many times after Ono's first performance. Some have been done by Yoko Ono again, or have been reenacted by other artists. In 1971, Ono presented the instructions for Cut Piece in her paperback edition of Grapefruit. Throughout the years, many people have discussed what exactly Cut Piece was about. Ono had stated at one point that this was a piece that she knew people would get different meaning from based on their experiences and personal thoughts.
I mean, it's not like anybody's ever done anything like that ever again, right? Yoko Ono was cutting edge, and nothing like that has ever existed ever again.
Marina Abramovich is not known for painting canvases or shaping clay. She's a performance artist, and for 40 years, she's been making art with her own body. In 2010, she staged her most famous performance to date, The Artist is Present. Abramovich sat silently in a chair at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City for 3 months, and people gazed into her eyes.
Tell me about what happens when you're sitting across from someone.
You open the soul, because that is everything there.
Some of the 750,000 souls who heeded her call seemed hypnotized. Some wept. As for Abramovich, sitting still for hours at a time caused pain in her hands, legs, and her spine.
If you're doing pain and understanding that you can control the pain and you can liberate yourself from the pain, then pain is okay.
But you might say that pain is Marina Abramovich's medium, and her message, deal with it. Back in 1973, she rhythmically jabbed the spaces between her fingers, at times drawing blood. Shocking stuff, but to hear the art world tell it, serious, important work that breaks boundaries.
One of my most extreme pieces was when I really pushed my body to the limits, because I didn't ever want to die. I'm not interested in dying, but I'm interested in how far you can push the energy of the human body, how far you can go, and then see that actually our energy is almost limitless. It's not about the body, it's about mind who push you to the extremes that you never could imagine. And there, very simply, I put on the table 72 objects with the instructions, I'm an object, you can do whatever you want to do with me, and I will take all responsibility for 6 hours. On the table was a rose, perfume, piece of bread, and grapes, and wine, and then was objects like really scissors and nails and a metal bar, and finally was also a pistol with 1 bullet. So basically, if the audience wanted to put a bullet into a pistol, can kill me. And I really want to take this risk. I want to know what is the public about and what they're going to do in this kind of situation. It was a really difficult piece because I just stood there in the front of that table, and in the beginning nothing really happened. Public would come, they would play with me, they would give me a rose, they would kiss me, look at me, and then public became more and more wild. They cut my neck and drink my blood. They carry me around, put me on the table, open my legs and put a knife between. The one person took the pistol, put the bullet, and see if I would really, with my own hand, push the target. I start moving and start being myself, because I was there like a puppet just for them. And that moment, everybody ran away. People could not actually confront with me as a person.
Nothing to see here, folks. Nothing to see here. I mean, you didn't think I'd tie it back to the Clintons, did you? I mean, it's not like we've ever seen anything like this before, right? It's not like the Beatles posed with dead babies and fucking raw meat. No, nothing to see here. It's not like Yoko Ono released an album called Yes, I'm a Witch. No, you're crazy. You're crazy. There's nothing to see here. So, John and Yoko are running around New York, dressing like Marxist revolutionaries, hanging out with Abby Hoffman. Who's that other one? Jerry Rubin. And they do this Free John Sinclair concert. They're getting involved with the IRA. Either through naivety or through design, they were getting in with some far left revolutionary types. And they had the Nixon administration keeping FBI documents on them. They were trying to deport them out of the country on supposed drug charges. To hear it from most people's perspective, it's hagiography. Oh, poor John and Yoko, the mean old Nixon administration were spying on them and trying to deport them. They just wanted to live in peace in America. But did they? I don't know. They were hanging out with some very revolutionary people. But I do find it interesting that after they won the immigration case, they did kind of shut up about the political stuff. I don't know if they got the memo on that or what, but anyway, so they're living in New York, and I don't know how many of you know about the May Pang thing, but Yoko decides that John and her need to take a break, and she chooses his mistress for him. Her name is May Pang. That's May Pang. And they go live for like a year and a half on the West Coast. It's a whole thing. And we're going to get into that in a sec. So let's talk about May Pang.
Yeah, okay. I thought I was leaving the front door. Yoko set up?
Yeah. She came into my office one morning and said, May, you know John and I are not getting along. And I said, I'm sorry to hear that. And she goes, well, listen, he's going to start seeing people. I want you to go out with him. I said, me? I said, I don't want your husband. She goes, no, I know you'll be nice. I know he likes you. You'll go out with him. I said, no. And she said, yes, you will. And she got up and walked out of the room.
And so you went out with him?
No, not quite. I freaked out, of course. And then she went in, and I heard from John that she went in and said to John, I fixed it. And as he was shaving, he goes, fixed what, Yoko? And he goes, I fixed it so you can go out with May. He almost slit his throat. And afterwards, we both sort of went into our separate rooms, and she just wanted this to go on.
And finally you did become his mistress?
finally, and it was after John decided, you know, if she's going to let me do this and go out and have affairs, and I'm going to go for it. It was breaking up, and she even asked for a divorce, and she didn't expect the answer to come from John to say, okay, fine, let's do it. And it was only a month or two later, she realized that he meant it, that she said, oh no, the stars aren't right, let's get
And also her lawyers told her that she couldn't keep much of the money if she divorced John.
So she backed down?
Oh yeah, she wasn't getting anywhere without John's name.
What about the occult? She was into the stars and used psychics, and someone told me tarot cards.
Directionalist, numerologist, you name it.
Everything. I mean, at one point she even had a tarot reader accuse me of stealing jewels from her.
Stealing jewels?
Yeah. And I mean, he said that he had sent these jewels to me to send to her. And of course, it never got to her, so when she called him up, the tarot reader said, oh no, I sent them to May. She obviously took them.
Oh, they used every kind of psychic you could think of, tarot card readers, astrologers. I happened to meet a man by the name of Charlie Swan or John Green, who was their tarot card reader. I didn't know it at the time, and he sent me to the Dakota to advise a friend of his about plants. And I found out later that this man had done some astrology reading and tarot card reading, and I was the right person. So they used all of this.
So they use it before they hired people.
See, everybody who worked there had to be astrologically screened. In my case, it was easy because my birthday was October 10th, the day after John.
That's
so
good.
That was a perfect qualification.
And apparently this man told me that my birthday was one of the tarot cards, the 14th in Venus. So yeah, John once said to me that, the Oracle has said that you are ceremonially placed around Yoko.
Okay.
So, real quick, the other lazy eye bought 5 Xanaxes. Tell me how much of a demon John Lennon is. I don't know if John is so much of a demon as he was very, very naive and gullible, and I think he was a beta cuck, as we would say nowadays. But thank you very much for the Xanaxes. You can buy a Xanax. buymeacoffee.com/mooseheaven. So, Yoko picks out May Pang as John's mistress. They're living out in Los Angeles. John's getting very drunk with Harry Nilsson. He's making records with Phil Spector, snorting coke off the mixing desk. Fun story. He's getting kicked out of the Troubadour with a maxi pad on his head. No picture of the maxi pad. But I hope that that's a spilled drink in his lap. So him and Harry Nilsson are getting very drunk and heckling the Smothers Brothers. And then, just as quickly as this relationship with May Pang starts, it ends abruptly. Guess how that happened? So Yoko just decided that it was time for John to come home. He'd been out with May Pang too long, and now it's time for him to come home. But I'm gonna let May Pang tell it. Once again, nice transition.
Asked to comment on this story, Yoko said,
I think it's totally unfair because obviously for me to discuss that relationship, my view would be construed as subjective and probably rightly so. And I don't think that I'm in a position to discuss that.
One morning I came into my office and bright and early she's right in my office, sitting right across from me. And I said, oh, Yoko, you're up. And she said, yes, I must talk to you. And I said, okay. So I pulled out my notepad and my pen, and I said, well, okay. He goes, well, you know that John and I are not getting along. And I said, well, I'm sorry to hear that. And we're thinking, God, everybody knows in the house that they weren't getting along. So he's going to start seeing other people. I said, oh. And my first thought was, who am I going to be working for, her or him? And finally she said, well, you know, I know that he likes you. And my eyes just like lit up. And I said, what? Excuse me? I said, not me. He said, oh, no, I know you're not after him, but I know you would be nice for him. I said, why me? I said, I don't want to. Just because I know you'll treat him right. Don't you want him to be treated right? So I know you will. So I said, no, I can't go out with it. He goes, oh, yes, you will. You should. I said, no. And this went on, and she finally said, listen, you don't have a boyfriend. This will be the best. I said, no. And she said, oh, you will go out with him. I said, And she said, oh, yes, you will. And she walks out of the room.
It is generally assumed, because John was caught a couple of times, very drunk in public,
Right, it's about a couple
that
of
it was a
times.
lost weekend that lasted 14 months. He was a wild man at the time.
Right.
He was drinking too much at the time.
Right. When you hang out with Harry Nilsson, you don't have much choice here.
But he was also writing music.
Yes, he was doing a lot of music, and that's what the book explains, that he wasn't always drunk, because he was there to do all the music. And it was kind of strange. And then, of course, he called Yoko.
Usually it was Yoko calling John, sometimes 20 times a day, invariably telling him he was not ready to come home to her. One day she changed her mind.
She says, I'm thinking of taking John back. And I said, what? And she says, I'm thinking of taking him back. She had no explanation. She says, I think it's time.
Now, if we skip right to the end, very end of the relationship with John, so let's summarize it. You were together for 18 months between 73 and 75, both in love, I don't know, looking to buy a house, and John was looking again to work with Paul. Then Yoko invites John over to her house in Dakota for a hypnosis session to stop John from smoking. And this is really when the relationship changed overnight. Now, tell me about this, please.
Well, the only thing I can tell you right now is the fact that I had a bad feeling because she was so insistent on having him come that day. And you can't, you know, you always have, you got your gut feeling, and you just roll with it. And I did, and I told him, and he said, there's nothing to worry about, don't worry. And he said, listen, I'll be home this evening, let's go out for a nice dinner, wherever you want to go. And then let's make plans and get ready to go see Paul and Linda down in New Orleans. And as he's walking out the door, and I'm sitting there thinking, oh my God, I just did not like the feeling. And she wouldn't let me speak to him. It was a whole, it was a whole control thing over the weekend. And by the time I did get to see him, I looked at him, and he looked strange. And I said, what actually happened? He goes, I don't know. He goes, I drank some tea, I was throwing up, and, and then all of a sudden something, and he couldn't even explain it, and all he could say was, Yoko's allowed me to come home. Interesting. Interesting choice of words.
That's weird, isn't it?
Yes, and so I just leave it from there. I think everybody else can, you can make up your mind on
So basically,
how it goes from there.
hypnotized, and it changed his feelings overnight, and the relationship was over.
I just don't think it was, I don't think now, in hindsight, it was just only hypnotism, but I think that was part of it.
And I knew right there that something was up. And and we walked along. He said, listen, Yoko's allowed me to come home. And I just sort of looked at him and said, allowed? And he goes, yeah. I was very sad. I remember calling her up and saying to her, talking to her on the phone, I said, well, congratulations, you have John back now. And I hope you're happy. And I meant it. And she said to me, well, I don't know if I'll ever be happy. But it's neither here nor there. And she just said, I must go.
Oh. Yoko calls John out of the blue one day and tells him, I've been to this hypnotist. He's helped me quit smoking. You need to go see this hypnotist. He'll help you quit smoking. He flies back to New York. He goes and sees this hypnotist. And then after that, he breaks up with May Pang. Bringing it all back around. John said he saw a UFO with May Pang. He made a little sketch of it. Now, in doing research for this episode, I have listened, unfortunately, to far too many Yoko Ono interviews. And one thing I have heard her repeatedly call the time that she spent away from John as being a quote-unquote detox. What did she mean by that? Well, there's this guy, Fred Seaman. He was John's personal assistant. He wrote a tell-all book, so I'll let him take it from here.
But isn't it in your book that you say she's in heroin? I read the book last night.
Yes, she's been using heroin for a long time, since the late 1960s, and she's admitted it in public. She's said things like she took it as a celebration, and because she and John were in so much pain when they first got together, because the British media was really beating up on her, so that's when she, and John got into heroin.
But he was off of it. But
John got off, you see, and he stayed off. Certainly, I never really saw him do heroin. Yoko never really got off. She, from time to time, made an effort. She would announce to the staff that she was going to go on a cleansing fast, which was sort of her way of saying that she was going to try to withdraw. But to my knowledge, she never really managed, because I guess she didn't have the discipline to really withdraw.
Did she go on the cleansing fast? I know there was a 10-day of silence.
10-day silence, yeah.
Did they both do that together?
No, well, John did the silence. What happened was that Yoko sent John and me and Sean and my Aunt Helen, who was Sean's nanny, out to their house in Cold Spring Harbor. And then she showed up one weekend and announced that John was going to go on a 10-day silent vow. He was not allowed to speak for 10 days. He was not allowed to drink coffee. He was not allowed to read newspapers, watch television. No, he was allowed to watch television with the sound off. So she imposed all these restrictions on him, and then she disappeared back to the Dakota. And I found out that in the Dakota, she sort of barricaded herself in her bedroom with her boyfriend at the time, a man named Sam Green.
She had boyfriends?
She had a boyfriend, yes, at that time, a man that she was romantically infatuated with.
Did John know about this?
I don't think he fully realized at that time, in the spring of 1980, the full extent of Yoko's infatuation with Sam Green.
So he was the only man, or there were other men that you...
After Sam Green, she became involved with a man named Sam Havatoy, who is with her to this day, as far as I know. He moved into the Dakota after John's death, and he became her constant companion and business manager.
So while they were alive, was he having affairs too?
John, no. He didn't allow himself that luxury. He was terrified of his marriage breaking up, and he was just too scared. He did, at the end of his 10-day silent vow, he was allowed a trip to Cape Town, South Africa, where he told me he cavorted with hookers for a couple of days in a hotel room.
We started to talk about Sean's birth. Sean was born on the same day, so they had the same birthday as his father.
Right.
Now, was that a lucky coincidence?
Well, when I first found out about it, I asked John, I told him, this is an amazing coincidence that you guys are both in the same birthday. And he just looked at me and said, it wasn't an accident. There are no accidents. And later I found out that what happened was that Yoko had attempted to have babies on John's birthday several times, and she'd suffered miscarriages on October 9th, John's birthday, and that Sean was born by cesarean section on October 9th, several weeks premature.
So she went a doctor allowed that to walk in and say, I want the baby?
I don't think she announced to the doctor that she was going to have this premature cesarean. She just went into the hospital. Actually, she was in the hospital on the 8th, and as soon as midnight rolled around, she said, oh, I'm in terrible pain, you know, it's coming or whatever. She convinced the doctors to do the cesarean. The doctors didn't know what was going on. And when Sean was born, he was trembling and he was shaking. So the doctors did a spinal tap on him because they thought maybe there was something wrong with him, and when it turned out there was nothing wrong with Sean neurologically, they decided that he must be born addicted, that he was having a tremors from addiction. And in fact, John later hinted that Yoko may have done heroin during the pregnancy.
And that was...
Because John wasn't doing any, so it couldn't have come from him.
It had to come
And
from...
the doctors at first didn't want to release Sean. They threatened to either keep him or get an injunction against him. So John and Yoko fled the hospital, in a panic with the baby, and it was a real nightmare.
And she ate, after the baby, she tried to eat the placenta?
Well, what happened...
Wait, let's go...
Oh, okay.
Let's go to commercial. Am I correct when
Yes,
I say
you are
she tried
correct.
to eat the placenta after
It was
the...
her intention to eat the placenta.
I'm nauseous. Will...
So, Yoko Ono, everyone. What a fantastic mother. So, let's talk about John's murder. Oh boy. I never knew where this was gonna go. So, I'm not gonna give you a history lesson, but this is the Dakota building. It has its own spoopy history. Rosemary's Baby and all of that. It was one of the first luxury apartment buildings in New York City. And that's where John and Yoko were staying for the majority of the 1970s. And it's in front of the Dakota where John Lennon's murder happened. For context, this is the entryway. So you have a visual of what we're about to talk about. So this is where it happened. John was standing a little bit behind where this guard is. Now, the Dakota is a very luxurious apartment building. And the order of things would be, you would step off onto the curb, you would meet the guard, he would let you in through the gate, and then you would check in through that little door on the right-hand side, and then that's how you would gain entry into the apartments. So with that little bit out of the way, John was standing a little bit behind where this guard was. Now, the official narrative that you're about to hear from John Lennon's murderer is that he shot John Lennon in the back with a .38 revolver, and several witnesses attested that he shot John Lennon in the back. But the doctors and the nurses who examined him at the hospital said he was shot in the front from close range. So there's something there. Nevertheless, for context, this is the spot that it happened. And we're going to listen to Mark David Chapman describe what happened.
Welcome back to Larry King Live with Mark David Chapman. Mark, will you relive with us those terrible moments for you, for the world, for a lot of people around and in circles close to John Lennon? What happened that night?
Well, if you want to pick it up from the night, I was standing there with a gun in my pocket.
Knew you were going to shoot him?
Sorry?
Knew you were going to shoot him?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Tried not to, praying not to, but knowing down deep it was probably going to come to that.
Did you know it would be that night? Did you know you would see him again?
Yes, I knew that morning, oddly, when I left the hotel, some type of premonition that this was the last time I was going to leave my hotel room. I hadn't seen him up to that point. That's what makes it interesting. I wasn't even sure he was in the building. And then I left the hotel room, bought a copy of The Catcher in the Rye, signed it to Holden Caulfield from Holden Caulfield, and wrote underneath that, "This is my statement," underlining the word "this," the emphasis on the word "this." I had planned not to say anything after the shooting. Walked briskly up Central Park West to 72nd Street and began milling around there with the fans that were there, Jude and Jerry, and later a photographer that came there.
Okay. And then John came out that day, right?
He came out. I was leaning against the gargoyle studded railing and was looking down. I was reading The Catcher in the Rye, and I believe he got into a taxi and disappeared. And then later that day, I had gone to lunch with, I believe, Jude. We came back.
With who?
With Jude. She was a fan there that was there at the building. And we struck up a conversation about Hawaii, about John Lennon. She'd been there a number of times. And at one point during the day, she had left, and John came back out. I don't remember him going back in from the taxi, but he was obviously back in the building. He was doing an RKO radio special. And he came out of the building, and the photographer that I mentioned earlier, Paul Gorish, he kind of pushed me forward and said, "Here's your chance. You know, you've been waiting all day. You've come from Hawaii to have him sign your album. Go." And I was very nervous. And I was right in front of John Lennon there instantly, and I had a black Bic pen, and I said, "John, would you sign my album?" And he said, "Sure." Yoko went and got into the car, and he pushed the button on the pen and started to get it to write. It was a little hard to get to write at first. Then he wrote his name, John Lennon, and then underneath that, 1980. And he looked at me, as I mentioned earlier, he said, "Is that all? Do you want anything else?" And I felt then and now that he knew something subconsciously, that he was looking into the eyes of the person that was going to kill him.
Why do you think that?
Well, his wife was in the car, the door was open, and he's a busy man. He's going to go to a radio or to his record studio, and he's talking to a nobody, just sign an album for a nobody. And he's asking me, is that all I want? I mean, he's given me the autograph. I don't have a camera on me. What could I give him?
I would admit that is a strange thing to say. All right, so he leaves.
Yes, he leaves in the
car. And what do you do the rest of the day?
I stand around like an idiot waiting for him to come back.
And what time did he come back?
He came back about 10 to 11 at night.
Had you eaten dinner?
No, I had not.
Fear you might have missed him?
Probably.
Knew you were going to shoot him?
Yes.
How did that happen? What happened?
Well, the photographer left. In all fairness, I have to say I tried to get him to stay.
Because?
There were those that felt that I wanted him to shoot pictures of the shooting, which is not true.
Why then did you want him to stay?
I wanted him to stay because I wanted out of there. There was a great part of me that didn't want to be there. I asked Jude, the fan, before she left for a date that night. She said no. If she'd have said yes, I would have been on the date with her.
But you might have killed him the next day.
Oh yes, yeah, I would have probably come back.
The circumstances of the killing, what happened?
I was sitting at the inside of the arch of the Dakota building, and it was dark, it was windy. Jose, the doorman, was out along the sidewalk. And here's another odd thing that happened. I was at an angle where I could see Central Park West and 72nd, and I see this limousine pull up. And as you know, there's probably hundreds of limousines that turn up Central Park West in the evening. But I knew that was his. And I said, this is it. And I stood up. The limousine pulled up. The door opened. The rear left door opened. Yoko got out. John was far behind, say 20 feet, when he got out. I nodded to Yoko when she walked by me.
She nod back?
No, she didn't. And I don't mean to be so clinical about this, but I've told it a number of times. I hope you understand. John came out, and he looked at me, and I think he recognized, here's the fella that I signed the album earlier. And he walked past me. I took 5 steps toward the street, turned, withdrew my Charter Arms 38, and fired 5 shots into his back.
What, had you shot that weapon before?
That weapon, no. I didn't even know if the bullets were going to work. And when they worked, I remember thinking, they're working, they're working. I was worried that the plane in the baggage compartment, the humidity had ruined them. And I remember thinking, they're working.
What did Yoko do?
She, naturally, and I can't blame her, she dashed around the stair area. I don't know if it's still there at the Dakota today, but she just, you know, ran for cover, which is what anyone would do. Mm-hmm. John, according to what I've been told, stumbled up the stairs, and then I saw her come back around and then go up to the stairs, and then she cradled his body.
Did she scream?
I don't think she screamed, but a few minutes after that, there was just a blood-curdling scream from someone, and it put the hair on the back of my neck straight up.
Were you relieved?
No. What happened was I was in a... What happened before the shooting, before I pulled the trigger and after, were 2 different scenes in my mind. Before, everything was like dead calm, and I was ready for this to happen. I even heard a voice, my own, inside of me say, do it, do it, do it. You know, here we go. And then afterwards, it was like the film strip broke. I fell in upon myself. I like went into a state of shock. I stood there with the gun hanging limply down on my right side, and Jose the doorman came over, and he's crying, and he's grabbing my arm, and he's shaking my arm, and he shook the gun right out of my hand, which is a very brave thing to do to an armed person. And he kicked the gun across the pavement, and had somebody take it away. And I was stunned. I didn't know what to do. I took the Catcher in the Rye out of my pocket. I paced, I tried to read it. I just couldn't wait, Larry, until those police got there. I was just devastated.
Oh, lot to unpack here. So, Chapman flies out from from Hawaii to shoot John Lennon with a copy of Catcher in the Rye. Yoko doesn't even scream when he's shot. And I might add, she also refuses to release the autopsy report on John to this day. He's hearing voices. Yeah, nothing to see here, folks. Okay, this is a picture of Chapman and Lennon. This is what he's talking about. A photographer snapped a photo of them together when Lennon was signing his album. It's all very weird. Fascinatingly enough, here's a photo with Chapman and Bob Dylan a year earlier. So what, you say? Spirit? He was just a music fan who went crazy because he read Catcher in the Rye. Nothing to see here, right? Okay, well, again, let's hear it from Chapman, shall we?
You're looking at the words of a killer. This is a first exclusive look at the letters Mark David Chapman wrote to his arresting officer, Steve Spiro. Spiro was first on the scene on the night Chapman fatally shot John Lennon outside Lennon's home, the Dakota, in New York City, December 8th, 1980. What did Chapman say to you, if anything?
The first thing he said was, I acted alone. I thought that was very strange. And then he said, don't hurt me, and don't let anybody else hurt me. And I said, no, nobody's going to hurt you. You're with me.
Spiro put him in a holding pen, searched him, and took his property, including a copy of J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye.
One of the first things he asked in a letter that he wrote to me was, do you know where my copy of The Catcher in the Rye is? And I wrote back, sure, it's in the district attorney's office. It was vouched, and it's evidence.
You wrote back to him?
Yeah.
Why?
Why? I think because I wanted to have him admit certain things that never got to trial.
Like this. Look closely in this letter, dated March 10th, 1983, one of 4 letters Chapman wrote to Spiro. Chapman writes, Lennon was a phony of highest degree, but there were others who could and would have served the same purpose.
Spiro says Chapman had a hit list that went beyond John Lennon. Others targeted included Jackie Onassis, Marlon Brando, Walter Cronkite, and George C. Scott. Why? Spiro says Chapman thought these people were phony and hated phoniness, much like the main character in The Catcher in the Rye, Holden Caulfield.
He said that these people on the hit list, including John Lennon, were phonies. They were not taking their money and giving it to the charities that he thought they should be giving to.
Chapman writes Lennon sat in a bed and imagined. Why wasn't he rolling up his denims and getting busy? Steve, it is all in The Catcher in the Rye.
What's so important about The Catcher in the Rye? Why is that the string to pull? Well, I pulled that string. Chapman read J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye on the recommendation of a friend. The novel eventually took on great personal significance for him, to the extent he reportedly wished to model his life after its protagonist, Holden Caulfield. After graduating from high school, Chapman moved for a time to Chicago and played guitar in churches and Christian night spots while his friend did impressions. He worked successfully for World Vision with Vietnamese refugees at a resettlement camp at Fort Chaffee in Arkansas, where, by the way, he also received firearm training. You can find out more about that in the little documentary that is uploaded to members only. After a brief visit to Lebanon for the same work, he was named an area coordinator and a key aide to program director David Moore, who later said Chapman cared deeply for the children and worked hard. Chapman accompanied Moore to meetings with government officials, and President Gerald Ford shook his hand. Okay, spoopy doopy, right? World Vision. Okay, so he was involved with humanitarian groups. He wanted to do Christian things. What's the big deal, right? Well, John Hinckley Jr. was deeply involved with World Vision, a nonprofit humanitarian organization that receives heavy funding from USAID, the government organ that has historically been closely associated with the Central Intelligence Agency. He was close with the head of World Vision's ministries, a former State Department official who worked, among other things, as an advisor in Vietnam. World Vision. So, the guy who shot John Lennon and the guy who shot Reagan were both involved in world vision. What is world vision? Well, it's still around. And guess what they're doing now? They're working with Ukrainian refugees. Oh, go figure. But what were they doing in the 60s? Oh, well. Funny you should ask.
He just recently returned from South Vietnam loaded with information, very strong opinion, and some very good film. Welcome to Today, Dr. Pierce.
Thank you, Hugh.
A pleasure to have you here today to look at some of the film. We're going to show you a little more of the film later on that Dr. Pierce will narrate and explain to us. But let me ask you first, how you as a clergyman became involved there, and particularly as a war correspondent. That's a bit unusual.
Well, World Vision is an agency. It happens to be that we're a Christian agency, but we serve everyone. We're not out just to serve a particular sect. We want to be in the world what we think Jesus Christ would be if he were here in the middle of all these problems and needs.
First of all, I probably don't have a lot of good Christian thoughts about John Hinckley because he could have left my wife a widow and 3 of my children without a father. But, you know, as a Christian, I don't carry a grudge either.
That is former Secret Service agent Tim McCarthy on the unrestricted release today of John Hinckley Jr., more than 40 years after his attempted assassination of President Ronald Reagan in March of 1981. Reagan was shot after the bullet ricocheted off the presidential limousine. McCarthy helped to shield the president from Hinckley's .22 caliber revolver. When the smoke cleared, the then 25-year-old Hinckley fired 6 shots, hitting Press Secretary James Brady, McCarthy, and police officer Thomas Delahanty in the neck. Hinckley did what he did, he said, to impress actress Jodie Foster, with whom he was infatuated with. McCarthy can recount the day in vivid detail.
But in this case, he was behind a standard rope line, less than 10 feet away, pulled out his weapon, fired 6 shots in about 1.4 seconds, and hit 4 people when he did it. Almost killed the president.
Interesting. Coincidence? Maybe. But there's something there. Why is a clergyman working as a war correspondent in Vietnam? Oh, gee whiz. It's not like you're working for the Central Intelligence Agency or anything. That came from World Vision's own fucking channel, guys! But we are way down the rabbit hole. And it's getting late. Thanks, guys, for hanging out with me. Hope you've enjoyed this weird little journey down the rabbit hole. Spoopy doopy stuff. I got one more video that I never seen this one before. But I thought it was interesting. I don't know. John was a smart cookie. We can argue late into the night about whose side he'd be on if he was still alive. It doesn't really matter. But every once in a while, he dropped some truth bombs, and I thought we'd end on a high note. Let's listen to some John Lennon truth bombs.
I want to know how you, as a woman, feel about overpopulation in the world and its relation to polluting the environment.
How does Yoko feel about overpopulation? As a woman, I believe.
Yeah.
Well, I think the problem is not overpopulation as people believe it to be, but it's more of the balance of things. What, like food, some part of the world there's wastage of food, and in some parts, nobody has food. That kind of a balance, if that is solved, I don't think we would be worried so much about overpopulation.
I think it's a bit of a joke the way people have made this overpopulation thing into a kind of myth. I don't really believe it, I think whatever happens will balance itself out. and work itself out. It's all right for us all living saying, oh, well, there's enough of us, so we won't have any more. Don't let anybody else live. I don't believe in that. I think we've got enough food and money to feed everybody, and I think the natural balance, even though old people will last longer, I'm sure there's enough room for us, and some of them can go to the moon anyway.
You mean you think there's enough if it were
I don't believe
distributed?
overpopulation, you know. I think that's just a kind of myth that government have thrown out to keep your mind off Vietnam and Ireland and all the important subjects.
Oh, I think you're wrong about that.
Oh, I don't care.
I think all our society is run by insane people for insane objectives. You know? And I think that's what I sussed when I was 16 and 12 way down the line. But I expressed it differently all through my life. It's the same thing I'm expressing all the time, but now I can put it into that sentence that I think we're being run by maniacs for maniacal ends, you know. If anybody can put on paper what our government and the American government, etc., and the Russian, Chinese, what they are actually trying to do, you know, and what they think they're doing, I'd be very pleased to know what they think they're doing. I think they're all insane. You know, but I'm liable to be put away as insane for expressing that. You know, that's what's insane about it.
Guys, John Lennon Truth Bombs, thank you very much for joining me on this weird little journey we've taken. Thank you for the coffees. We'll be back, I don't know when, with something about Jack the Ripper. But guys, until then, hey, remember, in the pursuit of truth, trust no one. Good night, everybody.